Hey everyone, it's Robbie from Gamers, and I'm joined by Colin Campbell. Colin, why don't you tell us more about yourself?
Hey guys, like Robbie said, my name's Collin. Thank you again for having me here. I appreciate the opportunity to participate here in the community. Been a 40K hobbyist for the last 10, 12 years now at this point. Picked up towards the end of high school with my older brother, and we've just been going steady with it since.
Wow, that's fantastic. So, since high school, how did you discover Warhammer 40K?
So my older brother Josh, he got into it tail end of third edition with the Black Templars and Dark Eldar starter set.
Hmm.
I remember walking into Hobbytown, USA here when it was still in Tillman Square a couple of years, or 10 plus years back now. And they had an apocalypse game going on the table, and my brother and I saw that, and we just said, whatever this is, we want to be a part of it.
That's incredible. Now, that leads us to really my favorite question of this whole conversation. I jump right into it because, hey, I know
Yeah.
our listeners are curious. Convince me, Colin, that you are the biggest nerd in the world. Go.
Um, Gosh, there's a laundry list of evidence for that. My first custom lightsaber gets delivered this Friday. I cried when I read about the Istvan drop site massacre, and the seventh edition Blood Angels Codex gave me a legitimate adrenaline rush that had my body shaking.
I
I
am
mean, that's what I've
trembling
got.
on this side of the mic. That is insane. And I have loads of questions to follow that up with, but I'm gonna let that kind
Hit
of
me.
sit. So, so Colin, you reached out to us at Gamers, and I know you've reached out to me, and you're like, "Hey, I want to play more competitive." So I really want to ask you, what do you mean by that? What does it mean to be a competitive player, and what drew you into this area of 40K?
Yeah, so it kind of started with an amalgamation of things. When I, so I know that I've said I've been in the hobby for the last 10 plus years. I really started playing in the bulk of 7th edition. So that was really the first edition when I had a full army under my belt and I was able to start playing games consistently. And it started with Space Marines, it moved into Tau. And Tau 7th edition was the heyday of that competitive power, where, I mean, we had Interceptor AP2. It is the bane of the existence, jump, shoot, jump, riptides with marker lights. I mean, snapshots, it's still at BS10. Like, those kind of things where we really just had the ability to beat anything the way we wanted it to. And it was either that or it was full drop pod, Skyhammer Ultramarines with grav cannons. And it was just dripping. And I had a buddy here that also played Interceptor Heavy Tau. And it was very much the game was decided at a roll off. It was whoever went first won. We would table each other in the bottom of turn one, top of turn two, and the game very quickly became stale for us. And then 8th edition launched. 8th edition changed everything. The game really turned on its head, and I went from that super venomous competitive, I'm going to table you as fast as I can, almost to a narrative sense, because it kind of stomped me out of the hobby. And that's when I picked up Imperial Guard. And Imperial Guard was always a narrative approach for me because I just like tanks and the power of common man. And it just changed the way that I played. And not that narrative play is bad by any means, but it definitely dulled that competitive edge to where I don't want to say I was bad at the game, but there were definitely those quote unquote competitive mistakes that you would be making that it really just kind of dulled me to that higher sense of gameplay. And then with ninth edition, with the reinvention of Tau, with the new scoring, and just the way that the game mechanically plays differently from 8th edition, I told myself I wanted to stop sucking. I just wanted to get better at the game from a mechanical standpoint. So it was just a matter of understanding what it takes to be a competitive player and what it means to win in ninth edition.
What was the most difficult thing for you to make that transition? Because it sounds like, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, you played guard in a narrative sense and you had trouble breaking through that. And when I think of guard, I think of like historical figures. I think of like reenactment, putting my lines of troops together and marching them across the field to the fifa and drums and the heroics of that and how you're just going to win by sheer volume. But I have never seen any army, let alone Imperial Guard or Astra Militarum in 40K, play the way that that approach sounds like would be technically really more narrative. So, is that how you've seen it too? And what helped you get over that?
Yeah, so the biggest separation that it took for me is that the way the army plays in your head is not the way that it plays competitively. So the way that you read about armies in the stories and the lore aspect of it, it is completely different. And that's where the narrative aspect, because when I build a guard list, it would be cool. I have my six tanks, I have a complement of mechanized infantry, I have my artillery. This is what I want to play with. And then you look at it from a competitive sense and it says, well, this doesn't score well. This isn't fast. This isn't durable. This isn't hyper lethal. And that was the biggest disconnect for me, because I thought that I could bring a competitive mindset with a non-competitive list and shore up those shortcomings, and it just wasn't the case. You really did have to have both. Not that Imperial Guard has ever been a competitive list. Even all the way back to, I think the last time you would consider Guard competitive would have been Plasma Veterans with mechanized lists in the beginning of 6th edition. But Guard has not seen a competitive heyday since. And the most competitive thing that we could do was melee Bulgrins with a priest and Kadishan artillery with chimeras. And that was the direct opposite of what I wanted to play. I liked tank heavy gun lines, and I played Cadians because I'm a fanboy. Um, so it was that mental shift and just realizing that the ideas of the stories and the games and the narrative elements that you build in your head, they don't translate to the top end of competitive play by any means.
I think about guard in early, I think it was eighth. It's probably the first time I've actually played against them because it's not an army most people play. It might have been the second time. And I just remember charging into their tanks and shutting them down like that easily.
Are you sure it wasn't a game against
It may
me?
have been.
That might have been
If
me.
I remember right, you were a little salty about it, and I don't blame you.
Oh, extremely, because I'm pretty sure you played Gene Stealer cults. You deployed, 6 inches away from me turn one, and then because guard participate in one phase of the game in the shooting phase, and you locked me out of the game from the beginning. And that was the thing where I realized that the way that I wanted to play this army just fundamentally didn't work in even a semi-competitive sense, not even top tier. It's just guard were in such a weak spot, and the only way that guard were winning is if we swung first and we swung hard.
Yeah, it's a great point. And really the memories we have playing each other. You've helped me prepare for tournaments, and it was really great to kind of see how some of those experiences help spark your mind to wrap your head around the game because sometimes when you just get stomped. Now you've stomped me, I've stomped you in different games, and we've had close games as well. Um, that can be discouraging for a lot of players, but in you, it actually seemed to have sparked a more competitive spirit. Thinking about some games you've had in the past, have you ever felt bad beating someone either in a tournament or just a fun game so hard that you walked away from that table feeling that, oh hey, that person will probably never play this game again, or I probably just crushed their dreams? And was there anything you felt you could have done to at least encourage them to keep playing?
Yeah, so it's a fine balance. I've been on both sides of Stomp Hammer,
Hmm.
where somebody gets absolutely just tin canned. The most infamous again was in seventh edition. I thought I was going to be spicy and showed up to a 1250 tournament with three Imperial Knights, and game one, round one was against a Storm Surge, a Drone Net, and two Yavaras, and I was tabled in the top of turn one. I did not play that game. Um, that was brutal. So I've been on the receiving end of that, where I came home that night. I put those three Imperial Knights up on eBay because I was done with them for about 45 minutes, and then I came to my senses and pulled them down. Um, and on the delivering end of such stompings, also came with guard in 8th edition, because of the way that the line of sight mechanics worked and the overwhelming firepower of Lehman Russ turret double tapping the main gun, and with how cheap those tanks were, 137 points for a battle cannon Lehman Russ. My 8th edition list, I think, was 8 Lehmans and 2 Manticores, which is just an absurd amount of power in a 2,000 point list, specifically against our mutual friend Kevin, with his Ultramarines. It was those games were again a coin toss. If I go first, I wipe 70% of his army. If he goes first, he wipes 70% of mine, and that was again a lack of that competitive spirit between both of us because we deployed in full line of sight. We might as well have not had terrain on the table. We were the colonial British gun lines against the Revolution. We were just lining up to duke it out, and yeah, there were definitely a couple of games where I did feel bad at the end of the day. I mean, it was still a W for me, so maybe that's a bad mark on my track record because I felt good about just hammering down on an enemy. But yeah, there were definitely games where I felt bad, but I've also things I could have done differently. Throttle it back, understand your opponent that you're playing against, but in that same sense, I also don't ever just want to take it easy on somebody because I feel bad or like a pity move or things like that. And I'm also very cautious on providing proactive coaching and feedback because, again, that can sometimes come off condescending if I'm trying to play your army against me. Um, but I, in that point, I think it's just being a better judge of inherent skill levels and understanding what you're looking for with pickup games or the communities that you're playing in.
Yeah, no, that can be tough, especially when you give advice and it doesn't work out. You're like, oh,
Yeah,
you should fire against this squad, and they do nothing to it. And then you're like, oh.
and then you just swing right back, and those things they usually blow up in your face for it.
Yeah, but it doesn't hurt. And it's good to talk with your opponent. Now, so you would say you've really only been actually playing competitively as of the start of this year, is that right?
Not even the start of this year. I mean, the it probably tail end. Well, I guess you could say a tail end of February.
Mhm.
I mean, we're in April now, so the last 6 to 8 weeks have really clicked on the competitive sense.
What was your biggest accomplishment during that time frame, or really throughout the hobby? Maybe it's not necessarily through competitive play, but what do you put your hat on as your biggest accomplishment in the 40K world?
Not quitting. Um, there were so many times where I just felt disintuned with the hobby, and just not giving up on it. It's become such a core part of my hobbies and my interests. In a more direct answer to your question, every event that I've gone to, I've been in top five. So whether I'm good at this game or not, it's been good. Burke's Winter Blast back in 2016, we took my buddy Jeff and I. We took second, um, or maybe it was first. We placed well, and then stepping out of the event scene for quite some time, we went to the same winter doubles just this past year, and we ended up sweeping it. We went 3-0. We took first. So it always feels good to place. It always feels good to place well. And then again, the most recent doubles down towards York, we took second. So whether I'm in the scene or not, it seems to be that I end up placing well regardless of what we're playing. So I guess that would be the achievement I'd rally to.
Sounds like you should have been more active in the competitive scene sooner. So, thinking of that, if you could travel back in time, what advice would you give yourself? Maybe when you were in high school or even a little bit after high school, what advice about the 40K hobbying world would you give?
Yeah, so I mean, it depends on how you want to approach the hobby. If you're looking at it to be a competitive player, you need to understand that the way the army functions in the lore is completely different from how the army functions on a competitive tabletop, even from a narrative sense to a competitive tabletop. The biggest advice that I'd give anybody looking to explore competitive play is expect everything to die. All of your models are going to get pulled off the field, and you can win the game with one guy left. That was as you said, I would be salty and I'd tilt out of games. I absolutely would. I'd be attached to one specific tank or one specific character, and it would blow up and die, and then I wouldn't care about the rest of the game. The biggest shift to that competitive mindset is understanding that, in our games, when we spar against each other with just Tau, I mean, turn one goes, I remove 60% of your models, and then I have all 18 of my crisis suits in your deployment zone. You kill all 18, right? It's understanding that nothing is immortal. It doesn't matter how many defensive buffs you stack on it, it is going to die, and it's going to die in one turn. That was the biggest thing, is that you can stack as many defensive buffs as you want. In the competitive scene, it's going to die. If Mark Benning can turn one a Tyranid Harridan from your deployment zone, it doesn't matter how many shield drones you have. Your stuff is going to die. So understanding that and looking at it as more of a chess game where you can still win with one piece on the board, that's what helped me understand the competitive play a little bit better.
Yeah, it's a really good analogy because you really do have to trade pieces in this game. The more lethal it's become, and really it's become very lethal the later this edition comes, the smarter you have to be about what you use to destroy a unit because it's gone after you make that kill. So that's fantastic. Well, Collin, is there anything I didn't ask you that you wish I did so you could share with the community and the group?
No, I mean, those are the big ones. Understand how you want to enjoy the hobby, and enjoy it to the fullest from that extent. And actually, if I could go back and give myself even more advice, it's just paint faster. Paint all your stuff before you buy more, because that's the best advice anybody can give you in this hobby. But no, just understanding the parameters in which way you want to enjoy the hobby. You want to play it for fun, play it for fun. You want to play it for wins, understand how to win and play it for wins.
That's fantastic. Well, thanks, Collin, for joining us here for this quick snapshot to learn more about competitive players in the Lehigh Valley area. For all of you, if you're watching this video when it comes out or listening to it, we are running a really exciting 40K league starting June 4th through the end of July. Please reach out to us. Email us at gefstreaming@gmail.com if you want to join or to learn more. Well, thank you all gamers for joining us.